I never imagined I'd be entangled in a courtroom dispute over my very own backyard pool, especially since I'm not a member of any homeowners association. Yet that's precisely what transpired last summer, and it was quite the ordeal. My name is Alex, and for almost 2 decades, I've resided in my simple 4-bedroom bungalow on the town's edge. It's a peaceful area, predominantly inhabited by longtime residents who have been here even longer than I have. We aren't part of any upscale planned neighborhood or the like, just a typical suburban street with ordinary homes and everyday people. Approximately 5 years ago, I decided to reward myself by installing an in-ground pool in my backyard. It wasn't anything extravagant, merely a pleasant 16x32 rectangular pool with a modest deck surrounding it. It was ideal for cooling down on scorching summer afternoons or hosting a few friends for a barbecue. I followed all the necessary procedures, secured the permits, and had it professionally installed. The full package. It was a significant investment, but in my view, it was well worth it. Everything went smoothly for the first several years. I enjoyed my pool in tranquility, occasionally inviting neighbors to take a dip if I noticed them out in their yards on particularly hot days. Mrs. Thompson next door even picked up water aerobics, which was quite charming to watch. However, things began to take a strange turn last May. It started when I saw a couple of unfamiliar individuals snooping around my backyard one afternoon. I was in the kitchen and happened to glance out the window to see 2 men in polo shirts walking around the edge of my pool, clipboards in hand. Naturally, I went outside to inquire. "Can I assist you, gentlemen?" I called out as I stepped onto my back patio. They looked up, visibly surprised, as if they hadn't anticipated encountering the actual homeowner. "Oh, hello, ma'am," said the taller of the two, regaining composure. "We're conducting a routine inspection for the Crestwood Community Homeowners Association. Nothing to be concerned about." I frowned, puzzled. "I'm sorry, but there must be some misunderstanding. I'm not part of any homeowners association." The shorter man checked his clipboard. "This is 1523 Oak Avenue, correct?" "Yes, but—" "Then you are indeed part of the Crestwood Community Homeowners Association," he stated firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to complete our inspection." I was taken aback. In nearly 20 years of living here, I had never heard of the Crestwood Community Homeowners Association. Something suspicious was clearly unfolding. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property," I said resolutely. "I am not a member of any homeowners association, and you do not have permission to be here." The 2 men exchanged looks before shrugging. "Very well," said the taller one, "but you'll be hearing from us soon. Good day, ma'am." As they walked away, I stood there bewildered. What on earth was that all about? A few days later, I received a certified letter in the mail from the Crestwood Community Homeowners Association. With apprehension, I opened it and began to read. Before we continue with the story, please consider subscribing. It's my dream to once reach 1,000 subscribers. Now back to the story. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have installed an in-ground swimming pool on your property without obtaining the necessary approval from the Crestwood Community Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee. This is a direct violation of our covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and Rs. Furthermore, our recent inspection has determined that your pool does not comply with several of our community standards regarding size, fencing, and safety features. Therefore, you are required to remove the non-compliant pool within 30 days. Failure to do so will result in fines of $100 per day until the violation is resolved. Alternatively, you may bring your pool into compliance and open it for use by all Crestwood community residents as a communal amenity. In this scenario, the Homeowners Association will take responsibility for ongoing maintenance and upkeep. Please contact us immediately to discuss how you plan to address this issue. Sincerely, Linda Carter, President, Crestwood Community Homeowners Association. I had to read the letter multiple times before the absurdity fully registered. These individuals were attempting to assert authority over my property and essentially seize my private pool. It was utterly ridiculous. My initial reaction was to contact the police and report this as a potential scam. However, a quick online search revealed that there was indeed a Crestwood Estates development about half a mile from my neighborhood. They had started construction 2 to 3 years ago, building numerous identical large homes on what used to be an old agricultural property. Still, that had nothing to do with me or my residence. I had never signed any homeowners association agreement, and my property was clearly outside their designated area. This had to be a mistake or a brazen attempt at fraud. Either way, I wasn't going to accept it passively. I immediately sat at my computer and composed a response. Dear Miss Carter, I am writing in response to your letter dated May 20th concerning my backyard swimming pool. There appears to be a significant error, as I am neither currently nor have I ever been a member of the Crestwood Community Homeowners Association. My property at 1523 Oak Avenue predates your development by many years and is not subject to your CC&Rs or any other homeowners association regulations. The pool in question was legally installed with all the appropriate permits from the city. You have no authority over my property or how I choose to utilize it. Please be advised that any further attempts to assert control over my private property, including sending representatives to my land without permission, will be considered trespassing and dealt with accordingly. I trust this resolves the matter. Have a nice day. Sincerely, Alexander Reed. I printed the letter, made a copy for my records, and mailed it the very next morning. There, I thought, that should put an end to this nonsense. How wrong I was. Less than a week later, I received another certified letter from the Homeowners Association. This one was far less courteous. Dear Mr. Reed, we have received your response dated May 21st. Your assertion that you are not subject to the authority of the Crestwood Community Homeowners Association is noted but rejected. As of January 1st of this year, all properties within a 1-mile radius of Crestwood Estates automatically fall under our expanded jurisdiction. This decision was approved by a unanimous vote of Homeowners Association members and filed with the county clerk's office. Therefore, you are indeed bound by our regulations, whether you have signed an explicit agreement or not. Your continued denial does not alter the legal reality of the situation. You have 14 days from receipt of this letter to either remove your non-compliant pool or open it for community use as previously stated. Failure to comply will result in legal action. This is your final warning. Sincerely, Linda Carter, President, Crestwood Community Homeowners Association. I was furious. These people were clearly delusional if they believed they could unilaterally claim authority over properties they didn't own. It was time to escalate the matter. I immediately reached out to my friend Sam, who happened to be a real estate lawyer. After explaining the situation, he agreed to take on the case pro bono, mainly because he found the situation so absurd it would be amusing to litigate. Sam drafted a cease and desist letter, firmly stating that their claims were unfounded and threatening countersuits for harassment if they continued. We sent copies not only to the Homeowners Association Board, but also to the City Council and County Commissioner's Office. We thought that would be the end of it. Surely once they realized we were serious and willing to go to court, they would back down and acknowledge their mistake. But Linda Carter and her team were more tenacious than we anticipated. 2 days after the deadline in their last letter passed, I woke up to find a group of workers in my backyard, putting up a chain-link fence around my pool. I rushed out of the house in my robe, yelling at them to leave my property. Linda herself was present, overseeing the installation with a smug expression. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said sweetly. "Since you failed to comply with our directives, we're taking matters into our own hands. Your pool is now officially a Crestwood community amenity." "Like hell it is," I shouted. "This is trespassing and vandalism. I'm calling the police right now." Linda simply smiled. "Go right ahead. We have all the proper documentation. You'll find the law is on our side." I ran back inside and dialed 911, my hands trembling with anger. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sort of bizarre nightmare. But it was all too real. And little did I know, this was merely the beginning of a legal battle that would dominate the next 3 months of my life. The police arrived about 15 minutes later, lights flashing but sirens off. By then, I had put on some clothes and was standing in my driveway, arms crossed, glaring at Linda and her crew. 2 officers approached, looking perplexed by the scene. "What seems to be the problem here?" the older of the 2 asked. I began explaining, my words rushing out in anger. "These people are trespassing on my property and vandalizing my pool. They claim to be from a homeowners association I don't belong to, and they're trying to take over my backyard. Linda stepped forward, maintaining her composure. Officers, I assure you everything here is perfectly legal. We have documentation showing that this property falls under our homeowners association jurisdiction. Mr. Reed has been violating our bylaws, and we're simply taking the necessary steps to bring his pool into compliance. She handed them a folder filled with official-looking documents. The officers flipped through them, frowning. Ma'am, the younger officer said slowly, I'm not sure these documents say what you think they do. This appears to be an internal homeowners association vote, not a legally binding expansion of your authority. Linda's smile wavered slightly. Well, I'm sure there's just been some misunderstanding. Our lawyers assured us this was all above board. The older officer turned to me. Sir, do you have any documentation showing your property ownership and the permits for this pool? Of course, I replied. Let me go grab them. I dashed inside and returned with a folder containing my deed, property tax records, and all the paperwork from when the pool was installed. The officers reviewed these as well. After a few minutes of private discussion, the older officer addressed us both. Here's how this is going to proceed, he said firmly. Miss Carter, you and your crew need to leave this property immediately. You have no legal right to be here or to alter Mr. Reed's pool in any way. If you don't leave now, you'll be arrested for trespassing. Is that clear? Linda's face turned an unusual shade of red, but she nodded stiffly. As for you, Mr. Reed, the officer continued, I strongly advise you to consult a lawyer. While it appears your property is not part of this homeowners association, they seem to believe otherwise. You'll want to resolve this legally to prevent further incidents. I'm already on it, officer. Thank you. As Linda and her team packed up their fencing materials and left, I felt a mix of relief and lingering frustration. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The ensuing weeks were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers. Sam and I filed for an emergency injunction to stop the homeowners association from taking any further action against my property. We also initiated a lawsuit for harassment, trespassing, and attempted conversion of property. Predictably, the homeowners association countersued. They alleged that I was violating their regulations and owed thousands in fines and late fees. They even argued that by not explicitly opting out of their expanded jurisdiction, I had implicitly agreed to join their association. It was complete nonsense, of course, but Linda and her team seemed intent on prolonging the dispute, perhaps hoping I'd grow weary of fighting and concede. There was no chance of that. I was prepared to take this all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. As the legal battle intensified, tensions in the neighborhood escalated. Most of my immediate neighbors supported me, equally outraged by the homeowners association's overreach. But the residents of Crestwood Estates were a different story. I began noticing cars from Crestwood Estates driving by my house slowly, their occupants staring at me as if I were some sort of criminal. There were whispers and pointed fingers whenever I went to the local grocery store. Someone even left a hostile note on my windshield, calling me a selfish pool homeowner association enforcer. It was surreal. Here I was, merely trying to defend my property rights, and suddenly I was being ostracized. The worst incident occurred about a month into the dispute. I woke up one Saturday morning to find my front yard covered in plastic pink flamingos, easily 100 of them. A large banner was stretched between two trees reading, "Share your pool, Grinch." I was furious. This was outright vandalism. I called the police again and they took a report, but without any witnesses or camera footage, there wasn't much they could do. As I angrily removed flamingos from my lawn, my neighbor Sam came over to assist. "This is getting out of hand, Alex," he said, shaking his head. "What are you going to do?" I sighed, tossing another pink bird into a trash bag. "I don't know, Sam. I can't back down. This is my home, my property. If I give in now, what's to stop them from making more demands later?" Sam nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. And hey, you know we've all got your back, right? This affects all of us. If they can bully you into submission, none of our properties are safe." His words ignited a spark of inspiration. "You know what, Sam? I think it's time we stop playing defense. Let's show the folks at Crestwood Estates how they like getting a taste of their own medicine." Over the next few days, I went door to door in my neighborhood, explaining the situation to anyone who hadn't heard and rallying support. Nearly everyone was on board with my plan. We established our own neighborhood association. Let's call it the Oak Avenue Community Alliance. It wasn't a homeowners association with any real authority, just a voluntary group of neighbors looking out for each other's interests. Our first order of business? We took a page from Linda's playbook and drafted some official-looking documents of our own. These documents stated that due to our long-standing presence in the area, all newer developments within a 2-mile radius, which conveniently included all of Crestwood Estates, were subject to our community standards. And what were those standards, you ask? Well, we had some fun with that part. Highlights included: all homes must display at least one brightly colored garden gnome visible from the street at all times. Holiday decorations must remain up year-round. Lawns may only be mowed between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. on Wednesdays. Vehicles parked in driveways must be covered with polka dot car covers. Residents must wear whimsical hats when retrieving their mail. We ensured to include clauses about hefty fines for non-compliance, just as the Crestwood Homeowners Association had done to me. Was it childish? Perhaps. Legal? Absolutely not. But we aimed to make a point about how absurd their claims of authority were. We mailed copies of our bylaws to every home in Crestwood Estates, as well as to their Homeowners Association board, then sat back and awaited the fallout. The reaction was almost immediate. Linda Carter herself appeared on my doorstep the very next day, her face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, waving the papers in my face. "You can't just declare authority over our neighborhood." I put on my most innocent expression. "Why not? That's exactly what you did to us. I'm simply following the precedent you set." This is different," she sputtered. "We're an established homeowners association with legal standing." I shrugged. "And we're an established neighborhood that predates your development. It seems to me we have more right to set rules for the area than you do." "This is absurd," Linda insisted. "None of our residents are going to follow these ridiculous rules." "Oh, I raised an eyebrow, but I thought you believed in the importance of community standards and strict compliance with regulations. Isn't that why you've been harassing me about my pool?" Linda's mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering something about calling her lawyer. I couldn't help but smile. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like we might actually have the upper hand. Of course, we had no intention of enforcing our silly rules. The whole thing was just to make a statement. But over the next few days, we started noticing some amusing changes in Crestwood Estates. A few of the residents seemed to have a sense of humor. Garden gnomes began appearing on lawns. I spotted at least one person wearing a sombrero to check their mail, and someone even covered their luxury car with a polka dot sheet. It was evident that not everyone in the development was pleased with their homeowners association's aggressive tactics. Our little prank had exposed a division within their community, and it was beginning to widen. But Linda and her core group of homeowners association zealots weren't going to relent easily. If anything, our countermove only fueled their determination to assert their authority. The legal battle dragged on, with motions and responses flying back and forth. Our lawyers were confident we had the stronger case, but the homeowners association seemed intent on overwhelming us with paperwork and legal fees. As spring transitioned to summer, I found myself unable to even enjoy my pool, the very reason this entire fight had begun. Every time I thought about taking a swim, I imagined Linda and her associates watching from behind binoculars, taking notes on my unauthorized pool usage. It was starting to affect my mental health. I was stressed, irritable, and losing sleep. More than once, I caught myself contemplating whether it might be easier to simply concede and let them have the pool. But every time those thoughts surfaced, I reminded myself of what was truly at stake. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about the right to live peacefully in my own home without interference from power-hungry intruders. It was about standing up to bullies who believed they could trample over people's rights. So, I persisted. Little did I know, the turning point in our battle was just around the corner. As July approached, The tension in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. The Crestwood Community Homeowners Association had intensified their pressure tactics, sending daily letters threatening legal action not just against me, but against any of my neighbors who supported me. They even attempted to pressure local businesses to deny services to residents of our non-compliant neighborhood. It was clear that Linda Carter and her board had lost all sense of proportion. This wasn't about community standards anymore. It was a crusade, and they were determined to win at any cost. However, their increasingly aggressive actions were beginning to backfire. More and more Crestwood residents were becoming uncomfortable with the Homeowners Association's tactics. We started hearing whispers of dissent, of people questioning whether this fight was truly worth it. The tide began to turn one sweltering Saturday afternoon in early July. I was outside, half-heartedly trying to keep my lawn green in the summer heat, when I noticed a small group of people walking up my street. As they approached, I realized with surprise that I recognized them. They were from Crestwood Estates. My first instinct was to brace for confrontation. Were they here to cause trouble, to stage some sort of protest? I set down my hose and watched cautiously as they came closer. To my surprise, the man leading the group gave a friendly wave as they reached my property line. "Mr. Reed, I'm Tom Davis, and this is my wife Emily, along with our neighbors the Browns and the Nguyens. We're from Crestwood Estates, and we'd like to talk, if you're willing." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, come on in. Would you all like some iced tea? It's really hot out here." 10 minutes later, we were all seated in my living room, sipping cold beverages. The atmosphere was somewhat tense at first, but Tom quickly got to the point. "Mr. Reed, we wanted to come speak with you directly, neighbor to neighbor," he began. "This whole situation with the Homeowners Association has gotten out of hand. A lot of us in Crestwood didn't sign up for this kind of aggressive bullying." Emily nodded in agreement. "We purchased our homes there because we loved the neighborhood, not because we wanted to be part of some authoritarian homeowners association force. What they're doing to you and your neighbors is just not right." I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in months. "I appreciate you saying that. Believe me, I never wanted this fight. I just want to be left alone to enjoy my home in peace." Mr. Brown, a distinguished older gentleman, spoke up next. "We understand, and many of us feel the same way. The problem is, Linda Carter and her inner circle have too much power. They've been making decisions without properly consulting the rest of the homeowners, and anyone who voices opposition gets silenced. But that's going to change," Mrs. Nguyen added with determination in her eyes. "We've been organizing. The next Homeowners Association meeting is in 2 weeks, and we're going to call for a vote to recall the entire board." I leaned forward, intrigued. "You think you have the votes to do that?" Tom nodded. "We're pretty sure we do. This pool crusade of theirs was the last straw for many people, but we could use your help." "My help?" I asked, surprised. "What can I do?" "We'd like you to come speak at the meeting," Emily explained. "Tell your side of the story. Help people understand what it's been like to be on the receiving end of all this. I think hearing directly from you could sway any undecided members," Tom added. I pondered for a moment. It was a risky move, essentially showing up in the lion's den, but if it could help end this nightmare once and for all, it was worth considering. "All right," I finally said. "I'll do it, but I have one condition." "Name it," Tom replied. "If you succeed in recalling the board, I want a signed agreement stating that your homeowners association has no jurisdiction over my property or any homes outside the original Crestwood Estates boundaries. No exceptions, no loopholes." The group exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. "That's more than fair," Tom said. "If we win this vote, you'll have your agreement. You have my word." As they left later that day, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I dared to hope that this ordeal might finally be nearing its end. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I worked with Sam to prepare my statement for the Homeowners Association meeting, carefully crafting a message that would appeal to reason and community spirit rather than come across as antagonistic. Meanwhile, Tom and his group were tirelessly working within Crestwood Estates, rallying support for the recall vote. The night of the meeting arrived all too quickly. As I drove into Crestwood Estates, My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. After all, I was walking into a room full of people who had been told for months that I was the enemy. The meeting was being held in the community clubhouse, a building that under different circumstances I might have found quite pleasant. As I walked in, I could feel all eyes on me. The room was packed, with people lining the walls and spilling out into the hallway. Linda Carter was at the front of the room, her face turning a shade of red as she saw me enter. "Mr. Reed, this meeting is for Crestwood Estates residents only. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave." But before I could respond, Tom stood up. "Actually, Linda, Mr. Reed is here at my invitation, as is his right under our bylaws. Article 7, Section 3 clearly states that homeowners may invite relevant speakers to address the association, subject to a simple majority approval of members present." He turned to the crowd. "All in favor of allowing Mr. Reed to speak, please raise your hands." I held my breath as hands began to rise across the room. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a clear majority. Linda looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but she knew she was outmatched on this point. "Very well," she said tersely. "Mr. Reed may speak, but I must insist we stick to the agreed-upon agenda. We have important business to discuss regarding the expansion of our community garden project." Tom stood up again. "Actually, Madam President, I move to amend the agenda. I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board, to be followed by a recall election if the motion passes." The room erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Linda banged her gavel frantically, attempting to restore order. "This is outrageous. You can't just—" But she was cut off by the Homeowners Association's own parliamentarian, a retired judge who seemed to be enjoying this more than he should. "I'm afraid the motion is in order, Madam President. According to our charter, any member in good standing can call for a no-confidence vote at any properly convened meeting. The motion must be seconded and then goes to an immediate vote." "I second the motion," Emily declared firmly. Linda looked around wildly as if searching for an escape route. Finding none, she took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Very well. We will have a vote on this. Irregular motion. All those in favor of a vote of no confidence in the current board, please raise your hands." What followed felt like the longest 30 seconds of my life. Hands went up across the room. Not everyone, but a significant majority. The parliamentarian did a quick count, then nodded to Linda. "The motion carries. We will now proceed to a formal recall vote for each board member, starting with the president." The next hour was a blur of voting and vote counting. One by one, Linda and her allies on the board were voted out. By the time it concluded, the entire leadership of the Crestwood Community Homeowners Association had been removed from power. As the dust settled, Tom stood up once more. "I move that we allow Mr. Reed to address the association as originally planned. Given the events of tonight, I believe his perspective is more relevant than ever." This time, the vote to let me speak was nearly unanimous. As I made my way to the front of the room, I could see Linda and her former board members huddled in a corner, looking shell-shocked. I cleared my throat and began to speak. "Good evening, everyone. I know many of you may see me as an adversary, but the truth is, I'm just a homeowner like you. All I've ever wanted is to live peacefully in my home, enjoy my property, and be a good neighbor." For the next 15 minutes, I shared my story. I explained how it felt to suddenly be told my property wasn't my own, to be threatened and harassed over a pool I'd legally installed years before your development even existed. I talked about the stress, the sleepless nights, the feeling of being under siege in my own home, but I also emphasized that I didn't blame the residents of Crestwood Estates. I acknowledged that they too had been victims of an overzealous board that had lost sight of what truly matters: community, neighborliness, and respect for each other's rights. As I concluded, the room was silent for a moment. Then, to my astonishment, people began to applaud. It started slowly, but built until nearly the entire room was clapping. An older woman I didn't know stood up, tears in her eyes. "Mr. Reed, on behalf of Crestwood Estates, I want to apologize for what you've been through. This is not who we are. not who we want to be as a community. I hope you can forgive us." I was moved by her sincerity. "There's nothing to forgive," I responded. "Let's just move forward as neighbors, with respect for each other's rights and property." Tom then took over, outlining plans for a new, more limited homeowners association charter that would focus on community building rather than restrictive rules. True to his word, one of the first items they voted on was a clear statement that the homeowners association's authority ended at the original boundaries of Crestwood Estates. As the meeting concluded, people approached me to shake my hand, apologize, or simply introduce themselves. The atmosphere had completely transformed from hostile to welcoming. I left that night feeling a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The legal issues would still take some time to fully resolve, but the threat was over. I could finally relax and enjoy my home and my pool in peace. The aftermath of that night brought some unexpected changes to our little corner of the world. With the Hardline Homeowners Association board gone, Crestwood Estates and my own neighborhood began to form genuine connections. We started hosting joint block parties, community picnics, and even a neighborhood watch program that covered both areas. Linda Carter and her core group of supporters mostly kept to themselves after the recall, though I did notice her peeking over her fence one day as I was enjoying a swim. I considered inviting her over. After all, wasn't that what started this whole mess? But in the end, I decided some fences were better left as they were. As for me, I learned a great deal through this ordeal. I discovered the importance of standing up for your rights, even when it's challenging. I realized that sometimes the best way to combat absurdity is with a bit of absurdity of your own. But most importantly, I learned that when neighbors come together and communicate openly, there's no problem too big to solve. Oh, and I finally hosted that pool party I'd been planning before all of this began. Let me tell you, that was the sweetest swim I've ever had.